Buenos días.
Muy buenos días.
Peter.
Muy buenos días, Jamie. Jaime.
Jaime. The Jaime behind your Jaime.
That's true. That's probably true. To life, Jaime Almanzan.
It's enjoyable. Your Spanish, your accent in Spanish is quite enjoyable. My accent in Spanish is, I don't even realize I have an accent. In fact, I'm just speaking, and then when I go to Mexico and I see family, and they're like, "God, your accent's terrible." I'm not as Mexican as I think I am.
That's pretty funny.
Honestly, I am so excited to talk about this interview.
Tell people who our guest was.
Dr. Carl Cohn, former superintendent of the San Diego and Long Beach school systems.
He was also a member of the State Board of Education, I believe.
That's right.
I think he said that. But before your full disclosure, everybody, you're listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast.
Good job.
So glad you're here. Okay, go.
No, full disclosure, I just think Carl Cohn is a movie star in the ed world, in my opinion. Like, I really would love to talk to him. It had me like thinking about, wow, look at this. And that's a big deal. And it makes me go like, how did you meet Carl Cohn? Like, how did
Through
you
Gary Yee. Gary Yee, who used to be a school board member in Oakland, who then became superintendent of schools for a short period of time, has always remained a dear friend. And said,
there it is.
"Have you talked to Carl Cohn?" I was like, "No." He said, "Oh, you should." And there's another one coming up soon that I'm pretty excited about that we are trying to find a time. So I'll tell you about another time. It's like, man.
So I just think he's an amazing movie star, superstar. So excited to have the folks hear this interview. I resonated with so many different things he said. And I'm sorry to dominate this opening.
I want you to, and I want you to maybe suggest for what you would hope people would listen for, because it is I'd say complementary to so many of the conversations we've had. And because of his experiences, time doing this work, that he doesn't pull punches. He goes right at it.
No, he does.
So what would you like people to listen for?
It's so funny. I pulled out so much to talk about that I'm a little bit wary to answer that question, in that I think if I said anything, if I had to pick one thing, I'd say the concept of the after-action review, which is, where did I make a mistake? Or maybe it's like with humility. It's not even like a specific thing. Carl Cohn speaks from a place of humble leadership. The man felt to me to be crazy knowledgeable, while at the same time saying, this was crazy, over and over. And I just was falling all over myself. I just loved it. And he opens with the story about studying to become a priest, going to a prep seminary school. And I'm like, oh my goodness gracious. I walked down that. I started to walk that path. And quickly, I was nowhere near the amount of time put into it that he did. But I did end up, graduating with a religion major, and had a deep understanding that helps me today. My own study and belief, my faith, calms me and allows me to be a better listener. And I never really realized the link between the two for myself. This is for me, not. And so that whole conversation, that part of the conversation, was riveting. I ordered the book that he mentions. Here, listen for the book right away. I was like, I don't know anything. And I have family that are evangelical Christians, and I don't know anything. So I'm like, yes, please.
Okay. I was going to say, so not totally clear on what we want people to listen for, other than a book, a book suggestion.
Yeah, that starts out in the beginning of the whole podcast. Like,
that's right. No. That's right. I'll say what I would hope that people will listen for is, to your point, an authentic reflection during his after-action review. I would say also the staggering statistic about the money we spend on things like prisons, where it could be spent on public education, early childhood education. And I've heard those numbers before, and every time I am just wide-eyed in terms of, why would we make these decisions? And I hope you and I will talk a little bit about that a little bit after. You're listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. Our guest today is Dr. Carl Cohn. I know you're going to enjoy this one. We'll see you on the other side.
Hello, everybody. My name is Zach Taylor. I'm the Executive Director at the Center for Transforming Education.
And I'm Peter Stiepelman, a former superintendent from the Midwest and the host of An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership podcast. And listen, we call it an imperfect leader because one of the things that we do know in leadership is that we get into these positions and then there's sort of this expectation that we're going to be perfect. And that's just not the case. And what we're seeking all the time is an opportunity to come together with others who are doing very similar work and learn from each other, share our stories, share our successes, and also try to figure out how to solve some of our problems. And so Zach and I have created Talk Soup is what we're affectionately calling it, SUPT, right? In terms of superintendents coming together, learning together, and also having fun together. Zach, what else would you add?
I just say that in my work with school leaders that I've seen almost, a kind of loneliness at the top of the system. And the fact that oftentimes leaders feel lonely, it's a lonely place. And this is an opportunity to come, to even commiserate a little bit, but also to have a reflective practice, to find solutions and to come together with people who understand, maybe the only people that really understand what you're going through, and to find those solutions, to find ways to feel encouraged, to move forward day to day, month to month as we meet.
If you'd like to learn more, come over to our website, imperfectleader.com, and sign up. We'd love to spend time with you.
We look forward to seeing you.
Today on An Imperfect Leader, our guest is Dr. Carl Cohn. Dr. Cohn has served as superintendent in both the Long Beach and San Diego school systems, as well as the court monitor in Los Angeles. His service in Long Beach culminated with his winning the McGraw Prize in 2002 and the district winning the Broad Prize in 2003. In the past decade, he served the state of California first as a State Board of Education member, and then as the launch executive director of the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, CCEE. And in 2022, he was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Carl, welcome to An Imperfect Leader.
Delighted to be here, Peter.
It is so nice to meet you, and I've really been looking forward to this conversation for months. You wrote an article that really caught my eye because it served as a disruption, really, to the status quo of the superintendency. In public schools as contested spaces, you explored really how public schools have become the front line of America's intensifying cultural and political conflicts. And you shared a concern that educational leaders have often been unprepared for this level of political engagement. And I can speak being 25 miles from the state capitol in Columbia, Missouri during the pandemic, where it was no decision was not a political. I mean, the superintendency, every decision is a political decision, but this was like a snow day on steroids kind of thing. And so you shared this concern that we weren't prepared, and then you suggested that we may need to reconsider long-standing norms. Sorry, I often start with a softball. No softballs here, Carl. So here's my question: with more states embracing partisan school board elections or local elections that informally really establish these like blocks of candidates, what's your take on whether superintendents should begin endorsing candidates and really stepping into this political advocacy role?
I think what we found out, starting in a big way with the pandemic, was that schools really are the face of changing dynamics in the society. And you had a situation where in most instances, superintendents were merely following the directives of governors and their health directors. That really changed the dynamics of families, work life for parents, a whole host of things that in many instances we hadn't really seen before. And part of my argument is, though, that the right in America effectively has weaponized these issues in a way that we've been largely unprepared for. And so myself and a Harvard colleague, we have a grant from the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. We have a collaborative on the politics of the superintendency. And we're arguing that superintendent preparation, training, and support needs to change to meet this moment. And part of the challenge, the post No Child Left Behind consensus sort of identified school superintendents as instructional leaders. And we're arguing that today, first and foremost, superintendents are civic leaders. And if you're a civic leader, it calls for engagement, often with parties who may be outside of the school system. But anytime folks are having an election, we're arguing that you need to be cognizant, you need to be aware, you need to be focused, and it may have you doing things that you've never done before. And I sometimes talk about the example of an assistant superintendent calling me up in the last year and saying, I'm thinking about going for such and so school district as superintendent in Los Angeles County. For the first time in my life, I asked this candidate a question. What do you know about the faith communities there? Which is something I never would have asked.
Why would you have avoided that in the past? It seems to me that's a more traditional. I'm coming from the Midwest, which some would say was part of the South. And so engaging your faith-based community was you had to. I mean,
Okay. Maybe I'm California all the way. Where
no, exactly. I'm really curious.
Engagement with faith-based community would not be something that
because of this protective separation of church and state kind of thing.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's from at least from my point of view as an advisor to future superintendents.
No, I think it's interesting. I mean, because I ran into the buzzsaw being a Long Island Jew in the middle of Missouri. It brought its own challenges, right? I mean,
sure. Yeah.
So I'm really curious about your perspective there. But
yeah, so I've been on this Hewlett grant. I've been actually showing up at these raucous school board meetings where a local evangelical pastor has declared the public schools as the devil's playground. And part of what I was saying to this potential candidate was, have you explored what the faith-based community there is? And I think her answer was, I think it's largely Catholic. And we moved on in terms of the discussion. Part of what this Hewlett experience has caused me to do, full disclosure, I actually studied to be a Catholic priest before I got into education. However, our education, our theology was so narrow, we didn't learn anything about Christian nationalism. We didn't learn anything about evangelical churches. So I've been starting with Tim Alberta's book, The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory. I've tried to catch up. And that book is, from my point of view, an excellent one that gives you a full picture of religion that is rooted in patriarchy. And some people might look at me and say, Colonel Cohn, don't you know, by the way, this Catholic Church thing, that's an all-male priesthood and all that sort of thing is kind of rooted in patriarchy. Anyway, what brought that home to me in Southern California, the two school districts that were faced with that, once the evangelical majority got in place, one of the very first things they did was to dismiss talented female superintendents. Basically, if you're really understanding this kind of patriarchy, women should not be playing these roles as leaders of complex organizations. And it's one of the things that I'm not sure the media has done enough with. And in terms of my Southern California experience, the male superintendents seem to survive, even though there's this evangelical kind of takeover. And to the point where one district in Orange County, California, that was recently taken over by a conservative evangelical majority, largely female, they sent a message to the male superintendent that he didn't have anything to worry about, that they were not coming for his job. So I think that's something that I'm asking my friends in the media, I think we ought to take a look at. But what basically we're up against is the national culture wars brought local. So that where we talk about Tip O'Neill famously saying all politics is local, and I'm arguing, I think David Brooks of the New York Times has it right now, where he says all politics is national. Issues that haven't been compelling in a local community all of a sudden are front and center. Now, when I was selected superintendent of schools 30 years ago in Long Beach, I, believe it or not, was selected during the middle of the Rodney King riot. So the message really was pretty much, if social chaos and disruption is going to be the order of the day, Colonel Cohn is the person most likely to work with parents, community, law enforcement, and others to restore order. And the politics of my seemingly successful decade as superintendent in Long Beach really was local. Coalitions, getting support from various local groups for the school district's initiatives. I didn't have to worry about issues, typically conservative issues, getting in the mix, that sort of thing. The other thing that I readily admit, I had a huge advantage. I was a young person who grew up in that community, a homegrown kid. Everyone was rooting for my success. And I think that's a different
There is
kind.
something very powerful of homegrown kid, hometown kid made good kind of.
Yeah.
I want to ask you this question because as I'm listening, I'm thinking to myself, absolutely, there were certain issues that would come to the school board, and then the pandemic sort of turned everything upside down because, as you noted, superintendents were following the direction of pediatric infectious disease experts and virologists and local health departments and making decisions based on their input and recommendation. And then they sort of disappeared as the community went after superintendents as the face of the district. You're keeping me from my kid, which then translated into keep my kid from learning, from being in school. You're keeping my kid from that. And then it translated into, then what else are you keeping me away from? Everything from a child's preferred personal pronouns to what kind of books are in your library to all the different ways that now our nation has found itself divided. And so when looking back to 30 years when you were hired in Long Beach to the more recent cultural flashpoints that you write about in 2023, how has your perspective continued to evolve? Because even 2023 was a very different time than what you're seeing right now with increased scrutiny of public schools, where you have an entire state being told they won't get any of their funding, or that every school district around the nation has to sign off to say that they have nothing to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I'm curious, in light of what's unfolding now, what advice do you provide to superintendents? Should they still step into the fray?
Absolutely. We're going to need the next generation of the best people possible. One of the things that I happened on quite by accident, but it really sustained me for a long time. So I volunteered in a first grade classroom in North Long Beach, Colin Powell Academy, for 20 plus years. The quick backstory on that, there was a junior secretary working in the superintendent's office. It was a time when we were reducing class size in California, 20-1 in the primary grades.
That's when I got hired. Pete Wilson signed that legislation, and I got hired in the Oakland Public Schools.
Precisely. And so this junior secretary in the superintendent's office, who had a bachelor's degree, one day after we had been at an event where I was pumping up everybody to consider becoming a teacher, we get back to the office and she says to me, do you think I'd be a good teacher? And I said, Tammy, of course you would be a great teacher. Go for it. And she said, if I became a teacher, would you volunteer in my class? What's a superintendent going to say? Other than, of course, I'll volunteer in your class. So I ended up volunteering in her class, first grade class, 20 plus years. And what kept me grounded, I could see what was actually going on in a public school classroom before, during, and after the pandemic. And so this notion of woke indoctrination, the only thing I saw was an admonition from that teacher to those incredible first graders. Always be kind. That was it. There was no pulling out of boys and girls. Here are the possible genders. What do you think you'd like to be? That is made up.
So here's an interesting story. I had a dinner with a state board of education member from Missouri, and he and his wife wanted to ask me about what I thought about Florida had passed legislation that prohibited teachers from talking about sexual orientation. And they said, why is that important for kindergarten through third grade? Or why should teachers even be talking about that? I said, where do kids get their information? I said, the playground and the bus. And so when a kid says, my mom's bought me my birthday present, and the kid goes, oh, no, you don't mean moms, you mean your mom and dad. And the kid goes, no, I have two moms. And then the kid comes to the teacher and says, she says she's got two moms. Is that right? And the teacher's supposed to be like, oh, I can't talk about that. They went, oh, I didn't think about that. I said, our kids turn to their teachers to sort of make sense of the world. That doesn't mean that we're asking teachers to replace parents, but rather to say, of course, she's got 2 moms. They're wonderful parents and they're great.
Right.
You know what? Can't wait for you to see them at the chili cook-off or whatever it is. It's kind of nice. It's just kind of...
Or that teachers are prodding these discussions.
Exactly.
What happens in the real world.
Everybody's back from lunch. We're going to talk about,
Yeah. A youngster says, and the teacher then comments in a manner that makes that youngster feel valued.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that, because let's say now the teacher says, I'm prohibited from talking about that. I can't talk about that. Talk about it at home. You've rejected that child who knows that she's got 2 moms who love her. And in this case, at that dinner, the spouse said, or 2 dads. I went, or 2 dads. Exactly. So the unintended consequence piece of policy is sometimes so overlooked because there's this idea that in some way, shape, or form, we're going to vigilantly protect from what? From the way that our families look different? Great. That should be our strength. If you're just joining us on An Imperfect Leader, our guest today is Dr. Cohn, a retired superintendent in both Long Beach and San Diego, and a professor emeritus and senior research fellow at Claremont Graduate University in Claremont, California. In the leadership model that I use to advise others, there's a dimension, collective aspiration, and it's really the heart of what we do as leaders. It's in that dimension that moral focus and compelling purpose, it's where we ask the question, what do we want to create together? And it's where we make sure that we have a shared image of what success looks like. And in learning more about you and your work, and certainly in the article that you wrote, success looks like staying true to the purpose of school, which includes every child getting what they need. Sometimes we call that equity, or that every child is valued and honored, as you just noted, and they have a sense of belonging. That's inclusion for so many of us. What strategies do you recommend for equity-minded leaders to help build community support, particularly in districts where there is organized resistance and it's well-funded and it's ideologically aggressive? And so it sounds like you're doing some of this work with your colleagues. I'm curious, what advice do you provide?
One of the things that I've always done, which sounds odd for a superintendent, I have never passed up an opportunity to visit a prison. When you walk into a prison, what do you see? If it's a men's prison, you see males of color who have not been successful. So one of the things I always try and do with educators is get them to actually walk in to a place like that. And I did that when I was this new head of this small state agency called the CCEE. We visited 2 prisons out of the California-Arizona border. And what I wanted to impress upon the staff was, if we don't get this right, if we fail in what we are trying to do, this is what happens to males of color. And at the time, California was spending about, this was 2015-16, California was spending about $75,000 a year per inmate at these prisons, which was the equivalent at the time of a Harvard University education with room and board.
That's interesting. As you said that, I was thinking schools spend between, let's say, $12,000 and $20,000 per student. So this is already more than 3 times, maybe 4 or 5 times how much we spend per child.
Precisely. And as Harvard now costs about $120,000, that is what California is spending to incarcerate males of color who don't do well in our public education system. So the mission, if you only cared about economics and levels of taxation, you would get really fired up around, let's invest heavily in early education. Let's attempt to guarantee success for all of these youngsters on the front end so that we don't end up on the back end having to spend this kind of money just to incarcerate people, largely, again, males of color for long periods of time. Now, one of the things I did talk about is how, we adopted this program following my visit to the federal prison at Turtle Island. We adopted this program of teaching, making sure that early literacy was the centerpiece of what we were doing. And it sent a powerful message. When I actually listened to inmates about their experiences, it was all about, I never really learned to read. I was socially promoted, finally got to high school, realized if I couldn't read the textbooks, this was really a waste of time. And so I turned to other things to try and survive. But one of the things that I talk about today when I'm working with districts, when we adopted that program, you will not find a big board resolution talking about this is the greatest equity plan ever. We didn't rent an airplane with a banner saying Carl Cohn is the biggest equity warrior of all time. We just did it. And I do worry about how much time sometimes we spend on trumpeting equity plans or those kinds of things when the real work is the rescue. It's not a beautiful plan that makes us feel good. It's actually rescuing the youngsters. And the truth is, if you adopt policies that are neutral, if a white youngster isn't reading at grade level at the end of third grade, they get that 6 weeks of summer enrichment as well. Any other youngster, maybe from an affluent background that isn't reading at grade level, they get the 6 weeks. And so this is my view. I think sometimes we tip too far in celebrating seemingly moral superiority, and we get some blowback on that. And I think it's something that superintendents, we probably need to talk about behind closed doors, because I think there's such polarization in the country around various words, equity, diversity, that type of thing. Let's just stay focused on the rescue of all kids.
I love that as a rescue of all kids. I was indicating sort of you giving kids what they need. You'd never ask a child in a wheelchair to climb the stairs. You'd say, we're going to provide a ramp for you. And we're not going to trumpet, look at this ramp we built, right? We're giving you what you need without the political fanfare. And I think that makes a lot of sense. I'd like to ask you a question I ask of every guest who comes on the podcast. What does the term an imperfect leader mean to you? How does that resonate for you?
As someone who spent a lot of time, 9+ years studying to be a priest, imperfect really resonates with me. We were all seen as sinners when we started at the prep seminary as 13-year-olds. And when I finally left as a 23-year-old, I was still a sinner. But I did want to do something important with my life, and I was really inspired. It was 1968, and everybody who's old enough knows that was an extraordinary year with the assassinations of both Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy. And so for me, getting out, doing something important with my life, but knowing that I'm imperfect. And a lot of that has to do with the Gospels and all of the imperfect people who got a whole lot better because of their experience. So to me, I knew front and center that I was an imperfect leader. I didn't really aspire to be superintendent of schools. All I wanted to be was the best high school counselor who could really communicate with young people from different backgrounds. And somehow I got pulled in to larger responsibilities, but from day one, I always saw myself as an imperfect leader. And probably the first lie that I told as a potential educator, so I left the seminary, I walked into the personnel office of the Compton School District with my transcripts. The clerk gets the personnel officer to come out. He looks at my transcript and he says, I see you have a bachelor's degree in philosophy. Do you think you could teach Western civilization to 10th graders? And I said, of course I can, because that was my first lie because I needed that job. And so I knew from the very start that I was imperfect. And I stayed as an imperfect leader throughout my superintendencies.
And we'll be right back. Hey, district leaders, I know you already know this. In schools worldwide, cell phones are posing real challenges on student engagement and mental well-being, and I want you to meet Yonder, a proud sponsor of an imperfect leader. And let me share this story from a visit I made to some schools in Silicon Valley. I asked some kids what they liked about Yonder, and after some funny looks, they shared that actually, with Yonder, teachers don't have to battle with them over phones anymore. In fact, one kid said to me he didn't have to worry anymore about his parents texting him in class, and the kid next to him sort of shoved him and goes, "Texting? My mom used to FaceTime me in class." I want to introduce you to a support system that increases teaching and learning. I want you to discover why 1 million students choose Yonder daily. Minimize distractions, maximize learning potential. To learn more, go to overyonder.com. YONDR.
We're back for segment 2 of An Imperfect Leader called Imperfect Leadership in After Action. And my guest today is Dr. Cohn, retired superintendent from both Long Beach and San Diego schools, as well as a professor emeritus and senior research fellow at Claremont Graduate University in Claremont, California. And in this segment, we ask our guests to deconstruct a decision that they made, and then we discuss it. So I don't know what it is, but I can't wait to hear. Carl, what happened?
Looking back on it, a lot of people would probably say, Carl, what were you thinking? We decided that the best way to bring a better prepared high school student to our high schools was to have a program that took multiple eighth graders and gave them an extra year of instruction before they transition to high school. And in hindsight, again, a lot of people might say, what exactly were you thinking? Putting multiple eighth graders together in a single school.
Yeah.
How would that be a good thing?
So if I could just interrupt for a quick second, just so I make sure I understand. You have multiple eighth graders who have already demonstrated that they were failing. And you're thinking, I think, because you made mention earlier about social promotion and your own experiences visiting prisons and seeing the high levels of illiteracy and dropouts. We do know, at least in where I was in Missouri, 4 out of 5 inmates were dropouts. 4 out of 5 in the state of Missouri were illiterate. And it's what prompted the chief, the prison system to look at third grade reading scores to determine how many prison beds they were going to need. So I'm guessing what was motivating you was, we're going to make sure that kids are successful, and yet maybe what got overlooked, which is the question I'm about to ask, what got overlooked was potentially also what happens when you concentrate underachievement all in one place. Okay, what got overlooked? And please continue on with your story. I wanted to sort of summarize it as I understood it.
We were basically looking at the fact that huge percentages of youngsters failed multiple classes. And so they knew, hey, I'm going to age out. They're going to send me on to high school. And so the fact that I got 4 Fs in my 8th grade year, no big deal. I'm comfortable blowing off middle school because I know I'm guaranteed a spot at high school. And so we thought, okay, let's give them an extra year of instruction in a separate setting where we really hone their academic skills. And the bottom line, this turned out to be a hugely problematic.
My gosh.
We called it, every educator does, and oh my gosh, what were you thinking? We called it Prep Academy, and we had it at a separate location in order to get in 2 or more Fs leaving middle school. And you're in this setting where we really missed the ball in recruiting teachers for this experience. We failed to go out and get the best and the brightest of teachers. We failed to compensate them in a way that would make this assignment attractive and meaningful to them. And the reaction of this large school system was, hey, the district is creating another continuation school. And so teachers with all kinds of different skill levels, that type of thing, who don't like the rough and tumble of the large middle school or large comprehensive high school, can go to this assignment at the middle school, at this special prep academy. And we did not do the type of due diligence that we should have done to make this an absolute premier instructional experience for students. No surprise, we had huge discipline challenges with multiple F students. Sometimes the superintendent of schools and others would have to leave what we were doing and go out to that campus and help restore order.
Yikes.
It was not successful.
Carl, what about, I'm thinking from this balcony view, sort of seeing how this is unfolding, was a possible unintended consequence also, or did you receive accusations of you were creating a segregated school? I mean, I guess my wondering is, what did...
Yeah,
in part one, you talked about when you enter a prison, it is more likely than not that you're going to see inmates of color. And then as an individual entered this academy, what did they see?
Yeah, you saw a lot of students of color.
So just fueled one stereotypes and bias around kids and their abilities and potential.
And I have to say, the administrators did a decent job given the hand that they were dealt. But one of the other mistakes, Long Beach is a school system that actually serves 4 cities. And we located this new prep academy in a small city within the boundaries of Long Beach called Signal Hill. And so you can imagine the leaders of that community did not want students with those types of challenges in a school in their community. And so there were a lot of, it wasn't like one single imperfect activity on the part of leadership. We blew it on a number of fronts in terms of what we were trying to do.
As you look back, what did you learn about relationships? Or what new relationships were formed because of that?
Yeah, I think when you have a city, a large unified school district that actually serves 4 cities, the politics, the internal politics of those cities is something that you need to spend some time on. Even though Signal Hill is a tiny city, if they're complaining and going to the newspaper and talking about the fact that they weren't consulted just because the school district owns a piece of property there, the school district, in their view, is not entitled to collect the most academically behavior challenged youngsters and put them in the heart of that city. So that was one of the other things. But I do think we failed to market the opportunity to teach there in a way that we could have done a whole lot better.
Yeah, thinking about the recruitment of those there are special teachers who really know how to connect with kids, who also have the academic and the instructional chops to teach children who may need to learn in a non-traditional way or to take the time to really get to know kids. As you think about, I mean, this is a really incredible example and one that probably didn't want to relive, but I really appreciate you taking the time to do it. What was frustrating for you? Because to me, I'm thinking, here is a driven educator, superintendent, leader who is trying to make a difference for children, knowing that if nothing were changed, then dropout or success would have been somewhat unexpected. And so you would have expected there to be continued failure. So you tried to disrupt a system and intervene, but it didn't work as you had hoped. So what was frustrating for you?
I think all of this new kind of politics associated with that, if you're ever interested, we actually fessed up and wrote about it for School Administrator Magazine.
Oh, I love it. Please, where would someone find it?
Some summer of 1998, School Administrator magazine entitled Our Second Chance Program, the hardest work we've ever done.
We'll make sure that we put if not, I'll ask Jay Goldman at ASA for a link to it. But we'll try to put that in the show notes so people can really see continued learning from your past experience. What could you have done differently?
I think, in hindsight, out of the box, finding a Long Beach location for this school rather than in the face of a small, tiny community. Did not expect the blowback that we got. So I think I would have done that differently. I think I would have taken more time with HR and our labor partners to compensate the teachers who were going to take this on. And I think I would have also used our outstanding instructional leaders to be involved in the vetting and selection of the teachers who were going to be there rather than the usual transfer policy.
And in the end, what was something that was good that came out of this situation? Because every one of our experiences teaches us valuable lessons.
I think the big valuable lesson that I learned was that our high schools were better than we thought at accommodating youngsters who were in fact behind. So I think the program went for 2 years, and then we gave up and started sending these youngsters on to regular high school, and the high school stepped up and
That's
worked
interesting.
well.
Yeah. You mentioned at the beginning that you and a colleague are working on supporting and helping superintendents make that shift from instructional leader to adding political leader as well. And would you take a moment just to tell us how can they find you if they want to talk about that work or learn more?
Sure. Yeah. We've actually developed a booklet called the Superintendent's Political Leadership Field Book that we're making available to anyone who wants it. It's a 50-plus page guide that gives a superintendent the tools of actually working with communities on this transition that you, first and foremost, are a civic leader. You cannot neglect the importance of instructional leadership. And so new kinds of school district reorganization to make sure that nothing important falls through the cracks, but you, as the primary leader of the school system, you have to take on this responsibility of civic and political leadership. And our new guide gives you step-by-step guidance on that type of journey.
Fantastic. Our guest today was Dr. Carl Cohn, retired superintendent, professor emeritus, and senior research fellow at Claremont Graduate University in Claremont, California. Carl, we mentioned how important it is to take those prison visits to really ground one into the economic as well as human ramifications when we allow those who have been unsuccessful in school, what happens to the amount of money that is spent. Whereas if we were to invest from early childhood to all the way through the K-12 continuum, that we can make better outcomes for the entire nation. And that means shifting from that instructional leader, which I believe, as you just said, that is your expertise, but becoming the community's lead teacher or civic leader, then it almost ensures that your community will care about the institution that you're leading. And while you may have been and continue, we all are imperfect, no Hail Marys for you, as much as that may be in your past. I really want to thank you so much for the time you've given us today, and really grateful for the wisdom.
Peter, thank you. I really appreciate being a part of this, and I wish you the absolute best in terms of what you're doing. This is incredibly important.
So we're back, and I know we asked people to listen and that they're sort of, pushed to really sort of think about their systems. And this is one of those conversations where you almost want to really encourage people to go back and listen again, because I had the benefit of doing that in terms of preparing it for you and really listening again and just taking in the real wisdom that's there. And for me to some extent, confront my own failures or missteps. I know I talked about trying to create an alternative elementary school, community school, and where I fell short and those types of things. That's been a part of my own past and how I wish I could have done things differently. And to some extent, and I promise I'm going to let you talk, to some extent, Carl's saying, look, these happen to all of us. What matters is taking that learning and making better decisions moving forward. I really felt like when we talk about serving as a lead learner, he is the epitome of a human-centered lead learner, and really grateful for his time.
I wanted to hear what you thought about, you guys really resonated with each other on this, but that the line was so good to me that superintendents need to have changed, and that you are moving from being an instructional leader to a civic leader. And I just loved that.
Blew my mind.
Frame.
It blew my mind because it's actually something I had thought about and then had been rejected by so many I talked to. Because the best job I ever had, I think, was as the assistant superintendent, because I could focus on teaching and learning. Teaching and learning in kids, oh my God, it was great. When I became superintendent, all of a sudden, I was expected internally to be teaching and learning, and externally, no, you're a civic leader. And to hear someone like Carl say that was validating, and at the same time, it was validating. Just sort of, I wonder how many superintendents recognize and understand that.
It resonated for me about you, because when I hear you talk about your superintendency and the way in which you talk to other superintendents about superintendency, it often falls into these civic leader areas. So moves, actions, beliefs, all of that. The persistent story around giving out the passes to the theater performances and the football games, et cetera, to the elderly community that lives within your boundaries is a civic move. That's civic leadership.
Yeah.
That's what that's
Well, I'll tell you, and building a very strong relationship with our Chamber of Commerce, who then found a bank in town to pay for a guest speaker who I had already heard in Knoxville, Tennessee, who was the superintendent as well as the chair of the community foundation. And he walked, he was like, look, you're here in the South. I am a lawyer, but I'm also a preacher. And so he had this book he was kind of thumping as if it were a Bible. And he was saying, the community with the best schools wins. And we brought him to our community, and it created this rallying cry of the communities with the best schools win, and we want to be winners. Not that the community next door should be a loser, is that when we're all in it together, we're winners. And I got to see, I have a civic duty. It is a political role that I play in terms of rallying a community to care about its public schools.
So deep. I love that. There's the part that really stands out, especially as it relates to the word leadership in our podcast here, is that I'm in charge, or I have a role to play in the rallying part. That there isn't just be connected to your Chamber of Commerce. I also have to be the one that gets people up and ready to go do the thing.
They told me a story once, Jamie, about how the previous superintendent had not come to their meetings. The superintendent is an ex officio of their board, but they would still intentionally leave a chair there with the superintendent's name
with the plaque
to show this person's not here again, and they're going to ask us to raise our taxes. And the only time they do come is when they're going to ask for a vote. And so that really reminded me, and for leaders who are listening, is you really do have to be a part of the community. And the community's elders, the thought leaders, the decision makers, you have to be present. And I think you have used Ernesto Ceroli's talk a number of times with me that it is now, I feel like it is so important to me, is that is not the time for you to be talking. It is for you to be listening. Shut up and listen to what your community is telling you of its values and what's important to them. And then find ways to weave that into your mission as a public school leader.
Love that. Love that. That ties to something else that Carl Cohn talked about, which I don't think anybody is going to be blown away by this, but I do this shift from instructional leader to civic leader. And the comment he made about Tip O'Neill's comment about all politics are local, I still think that's true, but all local politics are national.
That's right.
And that part now that's what's sort of creating these ripples, like these, or not even ripples, waves of impact on all school systems. We're all like going, what's going on? It's moving and churning like crazy. Because local politics are national politics. And at the same time, sorry, I'm making multiple links here, but at the same time, he also talks about this is one of my favorite stories, is his former assistant who becomes a teacher, who he then volunteers in her first grade classroom. And when you get on the ground, it's just a teacher talking to kids about being kind to everyone. And so I make this connection of local politics to national, but on the ground, it is hyper local. You're still talking about people. There's just people who care about things and, love their children and want to make sure they're safe, want to make sure that they get a good education. Everyone wants this. Everyone wants this. It just gets distorted once it starts getting up to that superintendency level. And maybe if I could make a plea to the superintendents that are listening, do that. Volunteer, not just visit schools. The volunteering part is that's the daily showing up.
Yeah. I'll push back in the sense that they'll say to you, I don't have time. And a lot of them don't.
No joke.
However, they could do, and I did this, so I know it's possible, once a semester, substitute teach.
He's hitting on it, especially in the after action review where he talks about what he attempted to do.
Yeah, let's talk about that because I know we're running out of time.
Yeah. Everything in my heart understands what he attempted to do. When he said we didn't hire the best and the brightest to basically be the teachers in this school for the year, it made me say we should be hiring the best and the brightest all the time. Everyone should get the best and the brightest. That's our profession. We're struggling with that a little bit. But his approach or his idea was right. I just don't know there's a part of me that's, I don't know if you did it at the right time. Meaning that time period of the year or the time period of our cultural perceptions. I meant like age of the students, that identification of where these kids are struggling earlier is always your better bet. Always. The data show the more money we invest, back to the money, we invest more money at an earlier age for intervention, you don't have intervention later on.
He said the fact that the staggering costs in California at the time that he was paying attention to it was $75,000 a year for an inmate, which was the equivalent of a tuition room and board at Harvard University. And he's saying, and I commented, depending on the state or the district, it's between $12,000 and $20,000 that we spend on students. So we're spending 3 times as much to house someone in a prison.
To incarcerate a person, yes.
And incarcerate a human being and fundamentally change their life forever.
Yes.
And what if we spent that amount or even half of that amount on children? And you said something in a recent podcast where you said, people say, enough with the throwing money at a problem.
We can't throw money at the problem.
You said, why don't we try?
Yeah.
$35,000
Let's just try it.
Per kid.
Yes.
Could you imagine?
Yes. But that requires a massive shift in the way in which we fund schools. Truly the money needs to be pouring into elementary school, pouring in.
And I would even say to early childhood programs.
You know it. You know it. And how would you feel about doing that instead of the football?
Who can afford the lab schools on college campuses and who can afford the Montessoris and the Reggio Emilias and the Waldorfs? And then who is relegated? And I say relegated because I think Head Start is a marvelous idea. What I've observed in terms of the pay and then all the pieces that go into it, it is a safe place that is wildly better than being at home in front of a TV.
Yes.
Probably going to get some criticism. I've observed the Head Start program, and that's where they should be putting $35,000 per kid, no doubt, because I know the people who work there care deeply for what they're trying to do. It is just a impossible mission.
That's probably maybe one thing. I'll get in trouble for this a little bit. I don't know. It depends on who listens to us. If it's educators, then I'm in safe space. But that the most offensive joke or comment about being a teacher is that comment that says those who don't know how to teach. It is so oblivious and blind to what it takes to be an educator. It's not close. It's so hard to do what we're trying to do. And so when it fails, it should have failed worse. We put no money into it. We have this massive system where we put all of our children into it, and we're trying to teach them how to read. We're teaching them the basics of how a society functions. And when it doesn't work, we're like, see, didn't work. We should invest less. I'm like, no, it's the opposite of that.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's what Carl Cohn's saying. Is Carl Cohn is saying, not only do we need to invest more money, but we need to understand that the intervention at an early age, at any age, the intervention is it. You invest in children, in people, in kids, you're going to get a different society outcome.
I agree. Tonight I'm going to a meeting here in the Seattle area about affordable housing, and there is a rallying of opposition to building affordable housing in a particular area of our community. And I mean, it just reeks of NIMBYism, right? In terms of not in my backyard. And it's so interesting to me because this is exactly what Carl was forced to deal with, placing his program within a community that said, no, we don't want those kids here. those kids. And it's so interesting to me because in this case, what we're saying to the community is you want teachers to be able to live here, right? You want your vet tech or the phlebotomist to be able to live here. You want to go to that restaurant and have your server be able to afford their home and live here in the community. You want the tax revenue probably, right, of people purchasing things in this community. And they are so scared to death of losing whatever they perceive to be their pristine community. And I'm like, what on earth? So I've already filed my public comment, but I'm also going to talk about, are you kidding? If we're going to have a community where you can live and play and just have a fantastic, that's what a beloved community is supposed to be. So anyway, I can't tell if I decided to go to this meeting because of my conversation with Carl, but I certainly am. I'm bringing him with me in terms of feeling motivated to argue and to fight for the right things. So I hope as people listen to this conversation, they also leave with this motivation to keep fighting for what we know to be the right thing in terms of dismantling just oppressive systems that favor and where there are winners and losers. So let's all be winners. What do we say?
Exactly. This is great. I loved it. I truly loved it. It's one of those that I want to return to and keep listening to. It was great.
You've been listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. I'm Peter Stiepelman.
And I'm Jamie Amansan.
And we will see you next week. And before you say goodbye, don't forget, we'd love to have 5 stars and even a little comment. We appreciate it. Have a great week.
Music for An Imperfect Leader was written and arranged by Ian Varley. Sam Falbo created our artwork, a wood print inspired Daruma doll butterfly. Remember, imperfect leadership is not a scarlet letter. It's a badge of honor. It recognizes that serving as a lead learner is about being a vulnerable leader, an empathetic leader, a compassionate leader. We are proud to be imperfect leaders, so join us next time for another episode of An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast.